Stay well connected at home or on the go with SLT Mobitel. Stay well connected at home or on the go with SLT Mobitel.
Tonight, do more. US Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chair calls for more help for Sri Lanka from the Quad Alliance. Not so bad. The Health Minister K.D. Ramukwela says the medicine shortage is exaggerated and assures sufficient supplies in 2 months. Stranded. Private bus operators warn of further route cuts if no fuel solution is provided by the government. By hook or by crook. With the new Electricity Act amendments coming into law, CB unions vow to get rid of it by any means. All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9, this Wednesday, the 15th of June, 2022.
Best ever sunlight. Dan rupial 200ක best ever milakata.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening, you're watching First at 9 with me, David Ebert. The chairman of the US Senate's Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Bob Menendez, in a letter addressed to the foreign ministers of the countries within the Quad Alliance, namely the US, Japan, India and Australia, has called for more to be done to play a more proactive role in Sri Lanka's economic crisis. In his letter sent last week, Menendez has called for more to be done by the four nations, including the mobilization of additional humanitarian assistance, supply of badly needed fuel, and technical support and advice in the areas of financial accounting, health, food, security, and macroeconomic policy. Menendez has also called for a unified stance by Quad members at the UN Human Rights Council, once the High Commissioner's report on alleged war crimes committed during Sri Lanka's civil war is received. Last week, Chairman of the US Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Bob Menendez, wrote a letter congratulating Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Japanese Foreign Minister Hayashi Yoshimasa, Indian External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar, and Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong on a successful Quad Leaders Summit. While applauding the launch of the Indo-Pacific Partnership for Maritime Domain Awareness and the 13-nation Indo-Pacific Economic Framework as significant steps in bolstering economic integration and information sharing, Menendez has also encouraged the Quad to take a more proactive role in addressing Sri Lanka's political and economic crisis. He adds that similar to the Quad's response to the 2004 tsunami, today's iteration of the Quad can lead the way in working to avoid an economic implosion in Sri Lanka that could spark a humanitarian crisis with wider destabilizing regional impacts. Menendez states that while New Delhi has already taken a proactive role in providing loans and humanitarian assistance to the Sri Lankan government to avoid a meltdown, Washington is preparing long-term economic support and Tokyo is providing food assistance to the Sri Lankan people. These, he says, are all positive steps, but there is more that can be done by the Quad, including by mobilizing additional humanitarian assistance, providing badly needed fuel and offering technical support and advice in the areas of financial accounting, health, food security and macroeconomic policy. He also stated that through the new Quad humanitarian and disaster relief mechanism, Tokyo and Canberra can play a bigger role and demonstrate that the Quad is capable of tackling challenges across the entire breadth of the Indo-Pacific region. Menendez has also called for Quad members' unity at the UN Human Rights Council upon receiving the High Commissioner's report on war crimes committed during Sri Lanka's civil war. He also pointed out that under the Rajapaksa regime, Sri Lanka has been left on the brink of financial ruin and humanitarian catastrophe, emphasizing that diplomatic unity would demonstrate the Quad's relevance and strength within the emergent Indo-Pacific architecture. In addition, he pointed out that today, Sri Lankans of all backgrounds are rising up to make clear that it is time for change. Meanwhile, the Embassy of the United States announced today that the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation Board of Directors has approved $120 million in new loans to grow and support the Sri Lankan economy. The projects announced today include a $100 million direct loan to the Commercial Bank of Ceylon to expand lending to micro, small and medium-sized enterprises and address the credit gap for women-owned businesses, which represent 25% of MSMEs in Sri Lanka. Commenting on the funding, U.S. Ambassador to Sri Lanka Julie Chang stated that for 70 years the United States has provided foreign assistance, loans and trade opportunities to help grow the Sri Lankan economy and support the Sri Lankan people, adding that today's announcement is good news for the private sector, as DFC's $120 million in new investments will reach small and medium-sized businesses and help to provide equity, jobs and futures. The official embassy statement, however, stated that the announcements may be subject to congressional notification in Washington and other administrative approvals, and that more information will be made available when funds are ready for disbursement. Meanwhile, Health Minister Kelly Rambukwella says that medicine shortages are not as bad as people think, and existing stocks are being managed by moving around stocks between hospitals when the need arises. He added that the situation will have to be managed in such a manner for the next 2 months until ordered supplies arrive, which will then keep the country fully stocked for the next 18 months. The Chinese government has donated another stock of essential medical equipment to Sri Lanka through the United Nations Population Fund. The medical equipment and supplies worth $800,000 donated today is expected to bridge the gap in medical equipment for health staff working on maternal and child health across the island, the UNFPA explained in a tweet posted today. The supplies were received by Minister of Health Kelly Rambukwella from Chi Zhenhong, the Chinese ambassador to Sri Lanka. Speaking at the handover of the supplies, UNFPA representative in Sri Lanka Kunle Adeniyi stated that such donations go a long way in preparing countries such as Sri Lanka for any future pandemics.
Pandemics are never far away from us. We've learned now that pandemics are never far away from that. COVID has come. There would be another pandemic at some point. It's not a cause. It is because the world is not ready and our global systems are not ready to prevent these issues. So as countries begin to prepare for this, the resilience in country and the global health system needs to be built and strengthened. And we can only do that by more partnership in technologies, partnership in people, partnership in supplies, to ensure that we are more prepared the next time anything like this comes to us. So I really thank China for helping us protect midwives, protecting the frontline health workers, and ensuring that we continue to deliver children in this country in safe conditions and our health workers are protected.
Meanwhile, Health Minister Kelly Rambukwella spoke to media personnel after the event, where he addressed medicine shortages.
බෙහෙත් සිංගයක් කියන එක හරි වැරදි. එහෙම බෙහෙත් සිංගයක් මහා දරන්ත ප්‍රශ්නයක් නෙමෙයි මේ වෙලාවේ තියෙන්නේ. මේ වෙලාවේ යම් ප්‍රශ්නයක් තියෙනවා. දැන් උදාහරණයක් ගත්තොත් අපි එක යුනිට් එකක් 100ක් තියෙනවන්න පුළුවන් නුවර. තව තැනක තියෙන්න පුළුවන් 5ක්. ඒකට අවශ්‍යතාවය බෙදා හදාගෙන අපිට වැඩ කරගන්න පුළුවන්. මේ මාස එකමාරයි අපිට ප්‍රශ්නේ තියෙන්නේ. අගෝස්තු මාසේ ඉඳන් ඊගාව අවුරුදු එකමාරටම බෙහෙත් ගන්න මට සල්ලි ලැබිලා තිබෙනවා. මේ වෙනකොට ඩොලර් මිලියන 400ක්. අපේ අවශ්‍යතාවය ඩොලර් මිලියන 260ක් වගේ අවුරුද්දකට ඒ වගේ එකමාර ගුණයක් විතර මට ලැබිලා තියෙනවා. හැබැයි වෙලා තියෙන්නේ බෙහෙත් ගන්නකොට ඒක ඕඩර් කරලා කන්ෆර්ම් කරලා මාස දෙකක් විතර යනවා අවම ගන්න. ඒ මාස දෙක මැනේජ් කරගන්න තමයි අපි මේ උත්සාහ කරමන්කාව නාලිකාව කියලා තිබ්බා දරුවෙක් මරුණයි කියලා ණයක් අමෝලික බොරුවක්. ඒ ළමයා ආවිලා තියෙන මිනිත්තු 35කට පස්සේ ඒක විස්තරي ඔක්කොම ගත්ත ඇන්ටිවෙනම් සීරම් කියන ඉන්ජෙක්ෂන් එක ඒ වෙලාවෙම පාවිච්චි කළා තියෙනවා. කිසිම බඩුවක් අඩුවක් තිබ්බේ නැහැ අතර. ඒකට තිබ්බා ඉෂුව එකකට ගෙනිච්චත් වෙලා ඒකට එලර්ජික් සිටුේෂන් එකක් ඇවිල්ලා තියෙනවා. එතෙන්දී තිබ්බා ඒක කතා කරලා තිබ්බේ අපි ඒකට කියන ඇන්ටිවෙනම් කියලා මේ සීරම් එක. ඒ කියන්නේ මේකේ කිසිම අඩුවක් නැහැ. මං ගාව මාස 6කට ස්ටොක්ස් තියෙනවා. පිස්සුබල රෝගයට ප්‍රශ්නයක් තිබ්බා. මේ වෙනකොටත් ඒකටත් මාස 6කට බෙහෙත් වෙනවා තියෙනවා. ඉතින් බෙහෙත් එක තැන්වල තියෙනවා. නමුත් අපිට පාලනය කරගන්න පුළුවන් තැනකයි ඒක තියෙන්නේ.
Now, Archbishop of Colombo, His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjit, has called for responsible adults to unite and act now to prevent the country from heading further downhill under the existing system of corruption and greed. Speaking at an event at St. Joseph's College today, the Cardinal stated that the country's current issues stem from what he termed narrow-minded decisions by leaders of the past to keep the country in a permanent state of division.
We know that unfortunately in the last 40-50 years this country has slid into disaster, and the result we see today. Hundreds of people in queues, no medicine for the poor especially, food in short supply, no fuel. The entire industry and the economy has collapsed. And still the systems that were created from 1978 onwards have destroyed this country and its freedom, giving all the authority to one person. who can do anything he wants. And that's why power easily corrupts, and you don't want to leave that power, even if the entire population says no. That is the saddest part of our democracy. If we want to stop that, we, the adults of this generation, have to take our responsibilities into our hands and do whatever we can. It is not a matter of an individual person or an individual political party. It's a matter of the whole country and its future, the future of all these youngsters. This country has become divided. People don't trust each other anymore because there are deep divisions between the Sinhalese and the Tamils and the Muslims, and the Sinhalese and the Muslims. They are at each other's throat. The East attack was a result of that. This has been created over the years by very narrow-minded policies. There was no necessity for any government to bring the Sinhala-only Act many years ago and made this country become splintered. And also, that kind of policy has led to the breakdown of law and order in this country, where those who are responsible to ensure justice for people have to act according to the whims and fancies of political leaders. That is what has happened. So nobody can expect justice in this country. This country has suffered severely from corruption. We have a huge airport where not a single plane is landing. We have a huge tower which is absolutely useless and a wastage of money. We have to say this. This is what was called the wonder of Asia. And this is what was called the Saubhagya. This is painful to say this, but it is true.
And we'll be back with more stories after this short break. Do stay with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. Now, private bus owners are calling for an immediate solution as most of their fleets are out of operation due to the ongoing fuel issue. They warn that there can be serious repercussions if the issue is not sorted out soon. In the meantime, the government has put in place several measures today to provide relief to the public transportation issue, including the park and ride system from today. One of the most affected sectors by the fuel shortage in the country is public transportation. Due to the lack of buses in operation in the past few days, the public were seen having to wait for hours for buses to get them to their destinations. With that being the case, private bus owners continue to call for a proper mechanism that supplies fuel without interruptions to ensure their operations are not affected.
අද වන විට ඇතම් මාර්ගවල බස් අත දෙකයි ධාවනය වෙන්නේ. බස් අත 25ක් 30ක් ධාවනය වෙච්ච මාර්ගවල. ඒ වගේම ගම්බද පළාත්වල බස් අත ධාවනය සම්පූර්ණයෙන්ම ඇන හිටලා තියෙනවා. ඒ ප්‍රදේශවල කිසිසේත්ම ඉන්ධන නැහැ. ළඟම පමණක් අපි දැක්කා ඩීසල් අරගෙන බස් අත ධාවනය කරන්න කටයුතු කරලා තියෙනවා. පෞද්ගලික බස් අත තමයි වැඩි දායකත්වයක් ලබා දෙන්නේ. එක මේසක ඇවිල්ලා සාකච්ඡා කරලා මේකට විසඳුමක් ලබා දිය යුතුයි. නැත්නම් අද හෙටම විශාල ගැටන වලට මුහුණ දෙන්න සිද්ධ වෙනවා.
However, in a bid to manage the situation amidst the crisis, the government has taken several measures, with one being the implementation of the Park and Ride initiative. This allows passengers to park their vehicles at dedicated car parks and use air-conditioned buses to reach their offices. The service recommenced this morning at the Makumbura Multimodal Centre in Kottawa today. Further, the Park and Ride service also recommenced in the areas of Katubadda and Kadawatha as well. Meanwhile, in order to ensure fuel supplies for school vans and public transport, the government established 2 refuelling stations in Makumbura and Bastian Mawatha. The Makumbura filling station was vested with the public today under the patronage of Minister of Transport Dr. Bandula Gunawardena. Further, in a bid to strengthen school transportation, 20 buses were deployed to transport students today at the Makumbura Multimodal Centre. According to the Transport Minister, these buses will be up and running under a new schedule, expanding the school transport service. He also said that more buses for school children are expected to be added in the coming month. As for trains, the Sri Lanka Railways has taken steps to operate more trains along several railway lines from today. One such was the operation of an office train service from the Wagga railway station to Colombo along the Kalani Valley railway line. Now, Sri Lankan Airlines has denied media reports of a near miss between a Sri Lankan Airlines and British Airways flight on Monday in Turkish airspace. The incident took place when the Sri Lankan Airlines flight had been instructed to climb to 35,000 feet. However, onboard radar had shown the British Airways flight at the same altitude. Sri Lankan has commended the timely action and vigilance of the pilots and the state-of-the-art communication and surveillance system on board the aircraft that prevented any disaster. Sri Lankan Airlines has responded to reports circulating in media about flight UL504 avoiding a possible mid-air collision with another aircraft. A media report today had labelled the alleged incident as a near miss that avoided what it termed the biggest possible mid-air collision with another flight. The national carrier has denied that the aircraft was at risk of a mid-air collision with another plane on the 13th of June, noting that the pilots were able to operate the flight without incident. In the statement, Sri Lankan Airlines confirms that UL504, which departed from London to Colombo on the 13th of June, was not at risk of a mid-air collision with another aircraft at any point. It further noted that the vigilance of the pilots and the state-of-the-art communication and surveillance system on board the aircraft had enabled safe passage for the flight. Sri Lankan Airlines commends the timely action of the pilots operating UL504, which ensured the safety of all passengers, crew and equipment on board, it concluded. The incident report filed by the aircrew after landing in Colombo stated that after being cleared to climb to 35,000 feet by Turkish air traffic controllers, it had noticed a British Airways flight on its radar and informed Ankara about it. Following this, it had once again been instructed to climb to the altitude, but had observed an air traffic control conversation between the British Airways flight regarding an intermittent transponder failure. Following this, Ankara Air Traffic Control had then instructed the UL flight to maintain its altitude, thereby avoiding any collision. Meanwhile, state gas supplier Litro Gas Lanka Limited resumed its cylinder distribution after 11 days today, however prioritising essential services. Further, Litro chairman Mudita Pires said today that the cabinet has agreed to purchase LPG gas from its current Omani gas supplier, as the company has assured its ability to provide uninterrupted supplies for the next 4 months. The other prospective supplier, Siam Gas of Thailand, although having quoted a cheaper price, has stated that it can only provide a limited supply. The limited availability of fuel in the island continues to lead to large queues and closures of fuel stations. In Colombo today, members of the public, agitated by the lack of fuel, protested by blocking the busy Panchakawat junction. As a result, the police were forced to divert motorists to use alternative routes for the time being. According to Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe yesterday, the government has decided to prioritise fuel distribution in a bid to assure essential services such as electricity generation and transportation continues uninterrupted. Meanwhile, the country's gas situation seems to be no different, with heavy queues continuing outside Litro gas outlets. On Monday, Litro made a payment of $2.5 million for a 3,900 metric ton LPG shipment that was anchored in Sri Lankan waters for days, and unloading began yesterday. With that, gas cylinder distribution that was halted recommenced after 11 days today. However, newly appointed Litro Gas chairman Mudita Pires states that due to the limited availability of LPG stocks, the company's plan is to prioritise LPG requirements of essential services.
විශේෂයෙන්ම ඒකේ ප්‍රධාන ප්‍රමුඛත්වය ලබා දෙන්න බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන්නේ අත්‍යවශ්‍ය සේවාවලට සහ ඒක තමයි දැන් ලිටර් එකේ තියෙන ප්ලෑන් එක මම මේ මොහොතේ වැඩ බාර ගන්නකොට ගම්ම තිබුණු ප්ලෑන් එක විශේෂයෙන්ම ඉස්පිරිතාලවලට ආදාහනගාරවලට හෝටල්වලට ඒකම ජංගම රෙස්ටෝරන්ට් වලට අවන්හල් වලට ඒ වගේ අත්‍යවශ්‍ය සේවා කියලා අඳුන ගන්න තැන් වලට තමයි අපි විශේෂයෙන්ම මේකේ ප්‍රමුඛතාවය ලබා දෙන්න හදන්නේ. නමුත් ඊටමත් සුළු වශයෙන් අපිට ලිටර් එක ප්ලෑන් කරලා තියෙනවා නැත්නම් ලිටර් එක තීරණය කරලා තියෙනවා සමහර තට්ටු නිවාසවලට ඒ අවශ්‍ය සුළු ප්‍රමාණයකින් හරි අවශ්‍යතාවය ඉෂ්ට කරන්න මේ නැව හරහා. නමුත්
In the meantime, last month, Cabinet approved purchasing of LP gas from Thailand-based Siam Gas and Petrochemicals Public Company Limited, citing its lower costs compared to its existing Omani supplier. However, the Litro chairman says that the Cabinet has again decided to purchase LP gas from the Omani supplier due to their ability to provide uninterrupted supplies for the next 4 months.
මට කලින් හිටපු සභාපතිවරයා තීරණය කළා තියෙනවා අඩුම ගානේ මේ තියෙන ජාතික ගෑස් අර්බුදය විසඳන්න තවදුරටත් අපේ ටෙන්ඩර් එකෙන් ෂෝට් ලිස්ට් කරපු එහෙම නැත්නම් තෝරපු සියම් ගෑස් තායිලන්ත සමාගම සහ ඕමාන ගෑස් කණ්ඩායම් දෙකටම මේ අවස්ථාව දෙන්න ෂෝට් ටර්ම් සප්ලයි එකකට ෂෝට් ටර්ම් සප්ලයි කියලා කියන්නේ සාමාන්‍යයෙන් මාස දෙකකට තුනකට හෝ හතරකට වගේ කාලයකට ඒ ෂෝට් ටර්ම් සප්ලයි එක ළඟින් මිල කැඳවීම කරලා තියෙනවා ඒ වෙලාවේ එතකොට අපි දැන් මේ සංසන්දනාත්මකව බලනකොට තායිලන්ත සමාගම ඒවල තියෙන මිල ගණන් ඩොලර් 112ක්. එතකොට ඕමාන් වර්තමාන ගෑස් සැපයුම්කරු ඒවල තියෙන ගෑස් සමාගම 129ක්. හැබැයි මෙතන ප්‍රශ්නේ ඒක නෙමෙයි. තායිලන්ත ගෑස් සමාගම දීලා තියෙන්නේ ප්‍රයිස් එක මෙට්‍රික් ටොන් 6000කට පමණයි. ඒ අතරතුර ඕමාන් ආයතනය දීලා තියෙනවා මිනිමම් ක්වොන්ටිටි එක ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ ලොජිස්ටික්ස් එහෙම නැත්නම් ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ අර ප්‍රධාන නෞ නෞකාව මාලදිව වයිනේ නැංගරුම් ලාගෙන එතන ඉඳලා මෙහෙට ප්‍රවාහනය කරලා දෙන්නම් මාස 4ටම ගෑස් දෙන්නම්. හැබැයි ඩොලර් 129යි මිල සහ ටොන් ලක්ෂයක් අපි මිනිමම් ගන්න ඕනේ ලක්ෂ්‍ය මාස 4කටම ලංකාවේ ගෑස් අවශ්‍යතාවයට සරිලනවා කියලා ඉවල. ඊට පස්සේ මම හිතන්නේ කැබිනට් එක ඉදිරියේ තිබුණු ප්‍රශ්නේ ගෑස් ප්‍රමාණය වැඩියෙන් ඉල්ලපු තැන අනිත් සමාගම අඩුවෙන් දුන්න සමාගම දීලා තියෙන ටොන් 6600කට විතරයි. එතකොට ඒක කොහෙත්ම සෑහීමකටපත් වෙන්නේ නැහැ කියන තීරණය ගන්න ඇති. සහ ටොන් ලක්ෂයක් අරගෙන මිල වැඩි වුණත් ටොන් ලක්ෂයක් අරගෙන රටේ ගෑස් අර්බුදය විසඳනවාද කියන ප්‍රශ්නේ තමයි මම හිතන්නේ කැබිනට් එකට තියෙන්න ඇති. ඒ අනුව තීරණය කළා තියෙනවා ඕමාන සමාගමත් එක්ක යන්න කියලා.
Now, the certificate on the Electricity Amendment Bill of Sri Lanka to amend the Sri Lanka Electricity Act number 20 of 2009 has been endorsed by the Speaker today and will be hence brought into law, allowing anyone to apply for a power generation license regardless of the capacity. However, the Ceylon Electricity Board unions have demanded that the new amendments be scrapped, threatening to ensure its withdrawal by any means at their disposal. Speaker of Parliament Mahinda Yapa Abeyewardena today endorsed the certificate on the Electricity Amendment Bill of Sri Lanka to amend the Sri Lanka Electricity Act number 20 of 2009. The bill was passed with a majority vote without amendments in Parliament on the 9th of June. The amendments will permit persons to apply for a power generation license to generate electricity. Further, the amendments would remove the previously imposed restrictions on a person applying for a power generation license with a capacity of more than 25 megawatts and above, and would allow anyone to apply for it without any restrictions on their generation capacity. Accordingly, the Electricity Amendment Act of Sri Lanka will be incorporated into the legal system of Sri Lanka from today as Act number 16 of 2022. However, the Ceylon Electricity Board unions held a media briefing today calling for the Amendment Act to be withdrawn immediately.
අපි ආණ්ඩුවට කියනවා ඔබලා ගෙනාපු මේ සංශෝධන ඉල්ලා අස්කර ගන්න ඕන. අස්කර ගත්තේ නැත්නම් අපි ඉල්ලා අස්කරවනවා. ඕඩිසල් මාපියාවක් තිබෙනවා. මේ මාධ්‍ය සාකච්ඡා ඉංජිනේරු මහතු තියාගෙන මම කියනවා ඉංජිනේරු මාපියාවක් තියෙනවා. ඒ ඉංජිනේරු මාපියාව මේ වැඩ වර්ජනයේ වෙලාවේ හිටගත්ත විදුලි බල ඇමතිත් එක්ක ඔබ දන්නවද මෙගාවොට් එකක් නිෂ්පාදනය කිරීම සඳහා පැනල් හයි කරනවා නම් අක්කරයකට වැඩි භූමි ප්‍රමාණයක් ඕන. මේනකොට අක්කර දහස් ගාණක් දෙන්න මේ ව්‍යාකෘතිය වෙනුවෙන් අන්න ත්‍රිකුණාමල ඉඩම් මනිනවා. බරපතලම කොටස ඒගොල්ලෝ අත්පත් කරගත්තට පස්සේ ඒගොල්ලෝ භූදේශපාලනය ඇතුලේ අපිට බලපෑමක් කරනවා. ඔය දූපත් වල සම්පූර්ණ ඉදිකිරීම කරලා තියෙන අදානි මෝදි කියයි වහම මේ දූපත් ටික දැන් ලියලා දීපල්ලා කියලා. අදානි කියයි එහෙම ලියලා දෙන්නේ නැත්නම් අපි උඹලගේ ග්‍රිඩ් එකට දෙන්න විදුලිය අපි විසන්දි කරනවා කියලා.
මේ වහල මත ගහන පුනර්ජනනීය පැනල් ගහලා ඒක තමයි පුළුවන් තරම් ඉක්මනට කරන්න ඕන. මොකද ඒක මාස 3ක් මාස 5ක් වගේ ඇතුළත කරගන්න පුළුවන්. අදානිට අද දුන්නත් විදුලිය අපිට ලැබෙන්න පටන් ගන්නේ තව අවුරුදු 3කින්.
මෝඩම තීන්දුවක් තමයි මේ ගත්තේ. දන්නවා ගෙදර අර්බුදේ තියෙනකොට පොලී කාර්යයත් එන උදව් වෙන්න. ඇවිල්ලා කියනවා ඊට පස්සේ ඉඩම ලියලා දෙන්න කියනවා. ඒක තමයි අපි වෙමින් යන්නේ. එතකොට රට හැටියට මේ ජනතාව හැටියට මේ පාලකෝ ගන්න මෝඩ තීන්දුව අපි පෙන්වලා දෙන්න ඕනද නැද්ද?
In the meantime, independent parliamentarian Chandima Virakodi has urged the government to approve the 21st Amendment Bill that comprises of proposals put forward by his group and present it at the next parliamentary sitting on the 21st of this month. During a media briefing that was held this morning with the participation of other independent MPs, parliamentarian Patli Champikaranavaka called for 9 MPs to be appointed each to the 25 ministries and for each of them to be given a specific responsibility. He says that such a move would be better than appointing state ministers.
මේ 21 වෙනි ව්‍යවස්ථා සංශෝධනය අපි බලාපොරොත්තු වුණා ගිය සඳුදා කැබිනට් මණ්ඩලය අනුමත කළයි කියලා. මොකද සාකච්ඡා වාර දෙකක් අගමැතිතුමා පැවැත්තුවා. ඒක කල්යාම ඉතාමත්ම නරකයි. මොකද ජාතික වශයෙන්ුත් මේ රටේ ප්‍රජාතන්ත්‍රවාදයේ ඉල්ලන ජනතාවට මේ ප්‍රජාතන්ත්‍රවාදය ලබා දීම ජනාධිපතිතුමාගේ අගමැතිතුමාගේ ලොකු වගකීම. නැත්තම් නැවතත් රට දේශපාලන වශයෙන් අස්ථාවර වෙන අරගලයක් ඇති වෙන්න ඉඩ තියෙනවා. දෙවෙනි කාරණේ ජාත්‍යන්තර වශයෙන් සාකච්ඡා කරන්න යනවා නම් අපි ජාත්‍යන්තර මූල්‍ය ආයතන එක්ක ප්‍රජාතාන්ත්‍රික වටපිටාවක් සහිත ආණ්ඩුවක් තිබුණොත් තමයි ඒ සාකච්ඡාවලට ලොකු පිටු බලයක් වෙන්නේ. කරුණු 4ක් පිළිබඳ එකඟතාවයන් අපි සාකච්ඡා කළා. අපි යෝජනා කරනවා දැනට පත් කරලා තියෙන අමාත්‍යාංශ 25 අපේ පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ ඉන්න മന്ത്രിලා අපිට පුළුවන් 9 දෙනා බැගින් මේ සෑම අමාත්‍යාංශයකටම නම් කරන්න නම් කළා ඒ අයටත් වගකීමක් ලබා දෙන්න. අපි හිතනවා ඔය රාජ්‍ය ඇමති දූර දෙනවට වඩා ඒක ප්‍රයෝජනවත්.
ඉතින් අපි රජයට බල කර කියන්නේ එක ඉදිරි සඳුදාට කැබිනට් මණ්ඩලයේ අනුමත කළා අපේ යෝජනාත් ඇති සංශෝධනය ඊළඟ පාර්ලිමේන්තුව තියෙන 21 වෙනිදා ඒ පාර්ලිමේන්තුවට කරුණාකරලා ඉදිරිපත් කරන්න.
අලුත් සන්දානයක ආරම්භයක්ද මම හිතුවානේ.
නෑ එහෙම අලුත් සන්දානයක් නෙවෙයි.
දැන් මේ කොහොමද මේ සජබේ රෝල් එක කොහොමද? සජබේ ඉන්න මන්ත්‍රීවරුත් ගැලවිලා ඔබතුමන්ලත් එක මොනවා?
නෑ ගැලවෙන්න කිසිම දෙයක් නෑ. පොදුවේ මේ 21 වෙනි සංශෝධනය අනුමත කර ගැනීම සඳහා අපි එකට කටයුතු කරනවා. ඉදිරියේ අපි හැමෝම එකට කටයුතු කරන්න ඕන.
In the meantime, representatives of civil society organizations and union leaders met opposition leader Sajid Premadasa to discuss the 21st Amendment.
මේ රටේ තියෙන ප්‍රතිසංස්කරණ නෙවෙයි දේශපාලන ගේම්. අගමැතිපත් කරන එක දේශපාලන ගේම් එකක්. ඇයි අද 21ක් ගැන කතා කරන්නේ නැත්තේ? අද ඉන්නේ ජනාධිපතිවරයා රකින්න දොරටු පාල ආණ්ඩුවක්.
Welcome back. Now, stocks closed in the red today due to losses in banking and financial institution stocks. The all-share price index closed 1.48% lower at 7,772.8, its lowest close since June 7th. Meanwhile, the more liquid S&P SL20 index fell 60.54 points to 2,485.21. The day's turnover was 1.1 billion rupees, less than half of this year's daily average of 3.7 billion rupees. The food and beverage sector was the highest contributor to turnover, while the transportation sector was the second highest. Foreign investors sold a net of 5.7 million rupees worth of shares today. Further, the market has witnessed a total foreign outflow of 963 million rupees so far this year. The market has so far lost 4% in June after gaining 6% in May. Now, the US Federal Reserve is expected to announce the largest interest rate hike in a decade in order to fight the rapid inflation rates in the country. However, some economists argue that the aggressive hikes are risking further detriment to the economy and might trigger an economic recession. As US stocks have officially entered bear market territory since January, the US Federal Reserve anticipates the largest interest rate hike since 1994 to be announced today following a two-day monetary policy meeting. There has been an array of rate escalations in March and May, where the rates were increased by 25 points and 50 points accordingly, indicating the increases would continue in the upcoming months by the same amount. However, as the US faces its worst inflation in 40 years, the Fed plans aggressive rate hikes to tame the surges. According to studies conducted by the University of Michigan, the increase in inflation is at its highest level since 2008. Several leading banks and investment banks in the US, including JP Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo Bank, are preparing for a 75-point increase, which is the largest hike by the Federal Reserve in a decade. However, some economists argue that the aggressive hikes are risking further detriment to the economy and might trigger an economic recession. Meanwhile, Asian stocks fell today as investors across the globe awaited the outcome of the US monetary policy meeting, where a 75-point interest rate increase is expected to be announced by the US Federal Reserve. Japanese stocks in the benchmark Nikkei recorded a decline of 0.01%, while in the benchmark Kospi in South Korea was down by 0.69%. The Australian S&P ASX 200 slipped 0.5%, a continuous decline for four sessions straight. However, Hong Kong stocks rose despite the expected rate hike. The Hang Seng Index opened up 43 points or 0.21% to 21,111 points. Further, according to the data released on June 10th on the ongoing inflation in the US, it has been concluded that the more aggressive interest rates may be required to counteract the soaring prices in the country. However, as US stocks impact global markets, economists fear the steady increase in interest rates may trigger a recession. Russia has taken control over 80% of the Severodonetsk city and continues to launch intensive attacks against the remaining areas. Meanwhile, following more precision missile attacks by Russia's, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has called on his international allies to give him anti-missile systems. Over 80% of the eastern city of Severodonetsk as its forces continue to launch intensive attacks against the city. As reported by the Russian Defense Ministry yesterday, recent attacks have destroyed an arsenal of artillery weapons and ammunition depots. In addition, Russia's high-precision missiles have demolished 11 targets holding Ukrainian forces, 8 artillery units, and a host of other military equipment. In response, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says that his military is in pressing need of modern anti-missile systems from Europe as Russian attacks continue to target his military equipment. He further stated that he had requested for the delivery of such weapons, but is yet to get a response. Meanwhile, recognizing Ukraine's shortage of heavier weaponry, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg addressed the NATO defense ministers and members of the US-led transatlantic military alliance, calling for the continuation of heavy weapon and long-range weapon system deliveries to Ukraine. Furthermore, addressing reporters at a news conference, Stoltenberg emphasized the urgent need for arms deliveries to Ukraine, stating that it was an opportunity for NATO to step up. And that's all the news we have for you tonight. We hope you join us again tomorrow at the same time. Good night.